Welcome to Tuning Tanium, a global subject series. This is season 3 of Tuning Tanium. I'm Nikita Merchant. I'm part of technical enablement team and your host for today. Today's session is next level provision with web service integration. Let me introduce you to our speakers and moderators. Gene Fields is escalation engineer and he's 5 times Tuning Tanium speaker. Big round of applause for him. Tavis Ha is a principal escalator engineer, and this is his first time tuning Tanium. So welcome, Tavis. Over to you, Gene.
Thank you, Nikita. Let me go ahead and share out. As Nikita said, my name is Gene. I have been with Tanium roughly 4.5 years, and I am a control escalation engineer. So over provision, enforce, deploy, patch, as well as end user notification. And I am joined by Tavis. Tavis is also a principal escalation engineer of the provision module as well as deploy. So he will be helping today answer any questions that you might have. So today in our webinar, here is the agenda we will be going over. We'll go over what is a web service, quickly discuss some provision limitations. Also, we'll go over a web service setup with provision, a quick setup demo on that. Then I will do a quick demonstration of two types of web services that are being used with provision. Then we will do the conclusion and questions and answers. So first, what is a web service? Well, a web service is a standardized way for applications or systems to communicate over the internet or the network. It allows for different software on different platforms, or it is written in different languages. So in a nutshell, for Tanium provision, a web service could be used to retrieve device-specific configurations during the Pixie boot, send user-entered customization data to an external system, and you could even integrate with tools such as ServiceNow or Active Directory for automation. So it enables IT admins to automate new device setup, refreshing of existing systems, or re-imaging systems with a consistent OS and software. And as I mentioned, it supports streamlined and scalability device provisioning across an organization. So now let's discuss a little bit about the limitations of provision. So currently with provision, we're restricted on what we can do during that imaging process. This is why a web service is great, because it helps expand those capabilities. And as you are familiar with provision, we do have key value pairs. So those are the predefined settings that control the flow or processing of the OS bundle. And those are defined in the OS bundle itself. Then you can do some custom variables. These can be added in addition to the predefined settings. These custom variables are not used by default with the Tanium provision scripts, and they can be incorporated into your custom scripts that you're writing or variables used by existing scripts. And I have provided the link to our documentation here, giving a little explanation of each variable and how to create your own. Provision currently supports getting the settings through the ability to make a call to one or more web services. These web services take the information that is provided, and it will return a list of the additional settings or override any additional or existing settings that you may have. So the three below listings, these are the web services that we currently support. The web services URL, that's the global setting. It is called prior to the display of that OS bundle list in the provision wizard. Then you have web service key value. That's called after selecting an OS bundle, but it's also before any customization prompts that you may have in that OS bundle. And then finally, we have the web service post bundle or key value. Now that's called after the customization prompts are completed, and that enables custom calculations of other variables based on values that are entered by the user during the customizations. And these web services, they're specifically called by the URL, and that URL can contain variables. Both get and post methods are supported by specifying the method as a prefix to that URL. If no prefix is specified, then by default, we're going to use the get method. Now, for GET requests, any available variable can be provided to that web service as a query in the parameter of the URL. So you have to explicitly specify each value that the web service requires. Now, for post requests, all current variables are passed to the web service as a JSON encoded body file. And I will go over a demonstration of this as well. Here are just two examples. These are also in our documentation of web service that can be used. So for the first one, if you want to call two web services, you can specify the web service settings as follows. So in this URL, we're getting the model of the endpoint. So we're calling it from your web service URL with get settings and the model, and we're using the model variable. Now this is one that is specified in the provision documentation and is by default. And we're going to send that to your processing, whatever you're doing on your web server. The next is the static file. And this is also what I was referring to with the JSON. So because a web service is basically a web request that returns a JSON response, you can use the static files that are returned by a GET request. And if you specify that web service URL, such as your URL with that, again, model JSON, the model of current endpoint, let's say, is virtual machine for my lab, then the provision makes a GET request to that specified URL, and it looks for that JSON file named virtual machine. So if what it does then is it takes any variables in that JSON and adds it to that bundle. So if the web server contains a file by that name, then you put in the settings in that file. And then here you see, for example, if I wanted my time zone for any virtual machine that gets that JSON to be GMT Standard Time, this is the value I would put in that JSON file. So now let's talk about a web service setup with provision. For this webinar demo, I chose to go with PODE. PODE is not a Tanium product, nor is it endorsed by Tanium. And if you go to their website, you can read more on what PODE is capable of. And as always, please be sure to read the documentation of PODE and go through before implementing in your environment. So there are some prerequisites for PODE. PowerShell 7. This will not work on any out-of-the-box older versions of PowerShell. So PowerShell 7 is required. You must have access to the PowerShell gallery. This is how the modules for PODE, they're pulled in and installed. And here you can see the 3 install module commands within PowerShell 7 that will be used. All right, so next we want to make sure with the setup that all prerequisites are sorted out, that everything that I just mentioned previously in the slide is good. You would then open up PowerShell 7 as an elevated user, and we would run the import module for those 3 needed installs. So once PODE is installed, a few things to take into account is there is a config.txt file. Now that text file is what controls all the bindings that PODE is listening for on port 80. After this, you would just launch PowerShell 7 in elevated mode and run the PODE.PowerShell PS1 script. All right, so here is an example of installing PODE, and I'm doing this on server 2022. So you can see I've opened up PowerShell 7 and elevated as an admin. I'm running the install module name PODE. It then asks me if I'm sure I want to install this. I tell it yes. It will go grab those files, tell me that this is an untrusted repository, ask me if I want to install again. I tell it yes. Once this is complete, I will be prompt. I will just hit the up arrow and just add .web to install the next module. Again, it asks me, I tell it yes, complete that install. I hit the up arrow, delete, and then just put in PS SQLite. Again, asks me, I tell it yes, code is completely installed and I'm ready to use it. That simple. All right, so now we'll go actually into the demo of PODE itself. So as I mentioned in this webinar, I'll be doing 2 demos today for viewing. In the first demo, I'll be setting up PODE with the endpoint serial number. And this is used to get the name of the endpoint and place it in the OU I select. So no end user touching is required. Now, this does require you to know the serial number of the device that you are imaging. I'm using Hyper-V Virtual Machine. So first, I needed to find out the serial number since it's not physically on the endpoint. However, on a physical endpoint, you should be it should be much easier to find that serial number on the endpoint. And in the second demo, I will be showing you how to use the JSON file to tell the endpoint where to place that, be placed in the OU based on the location or the JSON file. And to do this, it requires a JSON file to be created for each location and then placed on the Pixie satellite in that Tools Provision Cache folder. Now, please note, you can do much more than what I'm showing you in this demo, but for time purposes, this is all I will be showing. All right. We want to make sure that within the provision settings that we have the web service integration configured. So when you go to your provision module and you go in the upper right corner, click on the gear or the cog, you will then go to global key values. And then you will just over in the bottom right corner, just enter in your actual URL of your web server. Next, we will be doing the entering in the key value itself for the web service. Remember, this has to be manually typed in. It is not one that's listed in the dropdown. So you would manually type this in, hit enter, and then enter in the key value of that web URL with the /API because we do make an API call. All right, and here is a demonstration that I have set up of setting up the PODE to be installed. All right, so first thing I need to do is I need to know what the bundle is that I will be using to do the installation. So here I just go to my provision module, look, and I can see that it is ID 12. I can go here and I go to my PODE where I installed it, and I see I have a PODE PS1 file and my database itself. So then I open up my database. I open up PowerShell, sorry. Open up the database here. And I will go PowerShell and actually browse to the PODE directory. And I will start the PowerShell script to begin the PODE database. And I will get the reply localhost 80, letting me know that it is being ran. Now here, I get the information that I need for my serial number. This is the virtual machine that I will be imaging. So here you can see I have the model, the serial number, and all the information that I will need. Go into localhost 80. This is the database itself. Here I can enter in the client name that I want, the domain name, the OU in which I want this unit to be dropped into. I will validate that my serial number does in fact match what I will be entering into the serial number field because this is what I'm basing this install on. Bundle ID 12 that I found in my provision module. This is just your ODJ domain or your web URL. And the bundle timeout just is the same as what it would be in provision. This is the bundle timeout to where it will go to the selected bundle if you haven't made a selection. So now I'm booting my endpoint into provision. I will select the bundle itself for here, the Pro Web Service, which is bundle 12. And we are going through the imaging process. Now for this recording, I did speed this up for time's sake. Here I am applying the OS image itself. Notice that I have not entered in any information for a computer name, organization, OU, domain name, nothing. My endpoint is now installing the client. I'm going to log in now. I can see that I am a member of the domain. So I'm logging in with a domain account. Once I'm here on the desktop, just for my own sanity, I'm going to go to the properties and I'm just going to validate that it is named correctly. As I can see, client 05, which is what I entered into the database, and it is also a member of the domain. So without any endpoint automation or endpoint intervention or touching, I was able to image this endpoint and throw it into my workstation OU seamlessly. So that was one demonstration of actually using the PODE database based off of the serial number. So in this demo, I'm going to be using the JSON file and placing it on the Pixie satellite itself and having the Pixie satellite act as my web service. So in this demonstration or this recording, it's going to show you exactly where I put the JSON files. So on my Pixie satellite, I go to my C drive, Tanium, Tanium client, tools, provision, and I create a folder, or I'm sorry, cache. Then I create a folder called location. And then in the location, I have my JSON files. So my workstation simply is just the OU. That's all I'm going for with this JSON. And I also have the same thing with servers. I just have the attribute for that web server or that web location for the OU. All right, so now that I've got that set up, let's image an endpoint using just the JSON. Here I'm, again, booting my virtual machine into provision. I will select the keyboard layout. And for this one, I'm selecting my JSON bundle. So I select my Windows 11 Pro JSON. Select that. Now here, I am going to enter in some information because I did not specify an endpoint name. And here I'm selecting the workstations because I want the workstation, I want this endpoint to go into the workstation OU. Now my endpoint begins the imaging process by downloading the needed files. Just like the other provision or any imaging process, it goes through, downloads the image, expands the files, will then update and apply the OS. Once this is completed, the endpoint then reboots, gets through installing the client, injecting any drivers, and then I log in. And you can see that Windows 10 is installing a couple of its apps that it does by default. I will go again and just validate the name, making sure that it did join the OU. Here I've got the name client 07, what I named it. It is a member of the domain. I will browse over to my domain controller. And then I will validate that within my OU that it is in fact in the workstations. So two ways I used to join this endpoint to my domain and throw it into the OU that I selected. One was by using the PODE database. The other was by using a JSON file. In conclusion, what does web service do with provision to expand the capabilities? Web services can enhance provision because it automates new device setup It refreshes existing devices and can re-image systems consistently. It scales provisioning across large environments with minimal manual intervention. We can integrate with external systems such as ServiceNow for data-driven provisioning. So provision is only limited as you want it to be. With setting up a web service, you can easily expand your imaging process to be seamless, easy, with 0% touching by the end user for completion. And depending on that web service you use, there are others. You've got PODE, you've got IIS, you've got Apache. Depending on what you select to go with, that depends on how many features or any customizations you can make. And as always, please understand Tanium does not offer support for these web services. We merely offer the ability to integrate those into our product to ease the provisioning process itself.
All right. And now let's move on to Q&A.
We'll start off with what happens if web services are down during the Pixie boot? Well, there's a few things that will happen there if it's down during that when you go to Pixie boot. There's going to be several retries with some delays. You will likely see a much longer imaging process if that service is down, and your results may vary depending on what specific settings you were pulling back in. For example, Gene and I were looking at one this morning where if that service was down and we're calling the host name, you might end up with just that generic Windows like desktop dash and a bunch of characters. So kind of depends on what settings you're calling. And then also in the provision Linux log, you should see some errors like error connecting to the server. You might get some type errors. There's a few others that might pop up, but you'll see those pop up when it's making the call to that web services API.
And it can take forever for the endpoint to complete imaging.
Oh yeah.
You'll see your endpoint instead of being 10 to 15 minutes, it can take 40 minutes because it's just completely or constantly retrying over and over.
Will Tanium ever look into an option like Intune Autopilot where the end user can log in, it starts the imaging process? This one has definitely been requested a few times. Now you can use Autopilot to reinstall an OS on an existing device. That is one that we do have in provision. But for the additional one of doing that initial stand-up and including Autopilot, that's one that I would recommend. Reach out to your account teams. Let them know that that's something that you're looking for. That way we can generate that need and present that to our engineering teams.
Yeah, and also there is I won't say there's a script that can be used as well to auto log in, but it's not one that is made public because it's not something that we do. But if you wanted to open up a support request for that, that can be provided as a script that can allow you to do that in the meantime.
What are some additional use cases for web services? Got a few thoughts on that. You can have this one could get really you can get really deep with this. So in the demo, we're staying fairly simple where, hey, we're requesting a setting, we're returning that setting back. But you can have underlying processing on that web service as well to do more than, hey, simple kind of matching. You can also have those web services reach out to other APIs as well. You can get really, really in depth with the things that you're doing. And something that might be a little bit more direct, even just returning a tag, a very specific tag based on a certain set of criteria. And then in your deployment workflow, Maybe you've got like an ongoing deployment set up in deploy, looking for those specific tags so that when that imaging process is done, hey, you've got an accounting bundle, engineering bundle, front end bundle, and depending on which tag they get determines the bundle that they receive. So a lot of different things you can do underneath to kind of customize.
And Tavis, I do see one that was, is this something that works for just on-prem environments, or is it only for virtual machines? This works for any. I just did virtual machine because that's my lab. You can integrate web services with cloud or on-prem. So I mean, as long as you have provision, you're able to use web service, because you're just going into, like I mentioned, the settings, entering in the URL and pulling it from there. So yeah, you can use this with prem on or cloud, and it can be physical virtual machines either.
Something I didn't notice goes to the next question that we have here. Were you securing your PODE instance? I didn't quite
I
catch
was
the
not.
HTML
Mine's
you
just
had.
HTTP. Yeah, I didn't do any self-sign, but it can do HTTPS. It does secure as well. Yes.
There you go. That was our next question. Can it talk to
Oh, okay.
HTTPS? How can you test your web service without messing with your bundles? Simple test when you've got it up. Anything that you can use to hit that API. So you can use curl. Send a curl to that web address. Also, Postman gives you a nice answer right there on your screen to see what that response is, and you can test it with the various with your various variable settings, and you can send that in and make sure that you're getting what you expect to see back. What is the best method for managing hardware manufacturer driver packs across a multi-site enterprise? Possibility of decoupling driver packs from OS bundles to just moved on my screen to efficiently cache only required drivers across each provisioning endpoint site without requiring recreating the OS bundle for each site. So this one kind of goes in a little bit more to the provision setup piece. So you've got different sites that all kind of need different driver packs. Right now, a lot of that does go into, hey, if you're going to have a different set of drivers, you might end up with a different bundle. That process should be getting easier. I don't want to get too much into roadmap on this call, but I do expect some work to be done on making that a little bit more streamlined. You can use some of the stuff that Gene's talked about as well to kind of customize which endpoints make which call. But that's something that we can also assist with. Account teams can assist with that. You can always generate a case with us as well if you get stuck on some of that setup. Looks like on the back of the HTTPS portion, can you integrate certificates for the HTTPS based web service? Yeah, so those certificates, if you're securing the HTTPS service, that would be on your backend side. I don't think we can add anything to the bundle side of that. So you would just be making that API call. Is provision able to image newer Macs?
Yeah, due to licensing, it can only image Windows and
Yeah.
Linux. You can have your Pixie satellite on a Mac, but due to Apple's restrictions, it's not able to image at this time. Yeah, that's a limitation of Apple, not provision, unfortunately.
Oh, I've got an answer to the previous one. They actually put their CA cert in the customer.zip, and it works for the web service piece. That's awesome. Thank you for that, whoever wrote that.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great.
That's all the questions that came in, and you answered everything. Thank you so much.